The last time I shared with you, we looked at a lesser known but still significant holy day on the church calendar, Reformation Sunday. And we marked it with a change in colors. We went to red, the only of two Sundays that we go to red, the other one being Pentecost, and the red being the symbolic of the Holy Spirit. And we kind of made a big deal out of it because it was the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther's tacking some discussion points on the cathedral door that sort of began what would become known as the Great Protestant Reformation. This morning, we're going to be looking at an even lesser known holy day, but again, a significant one, Christ the King Sunday. Another color change. We go from that olive green that we've used forever, it seems, to white just before we're ready to slip into the purple of Advent in another week. This particular day is oftentimes overlooked because of the way it's sandwiched in between Thanksgiving. We're still on the Thanksgiving theme, and the start of Advent in the Christmas season. Today is the last Sunday of what liturgically we refer to as ordinary time, or it's the 27th Sunday after Pentecost, which we celebrated, I think, this year, the first part of June. So this is before the beginning of Advent that will begin the new church year. So this is really the last Sunday of the church year. Next Sunday begins the first, and it sort of marks this climax and conclusion of Christ's journey liturgically through the life of Christ and the gospel message. So next Sunday we begin celebrating Advent as we kind of start the process and the journey all over again to remind ourselves not only who we are, but also whose we are. So the purpose here is to celebrate the coming reign of Christ as King of the earth. I think that also reminds us that God is with us in every season of life, not just in the liturgical church calendar, but in those calendars that we use outside of these walls and in our lives. And the idea that God is with us all the time can be a pretty significant thought and reminder and promise and assurance, especially when life just seems to get out of control. It gets a little crazier, more stressful. Not that the coming holidays are ever that for us. But I think we need a holy day like Christ the King Sunday, because there are absolutely no commercial trappings to it. You won't find Christ the King decorations or Christ the King greeting cards. And I think it's also important to look at this holy day because it's hard for us to relate to the majesty of Christ and also this idea that he was a good shepherd, this shepherd who was a king, or this king who shepherds his flock. But that is certainly a common theme throughout the Old and the New Testament. Certainly in Jesus' life, it's sort of the fitting prelude as we begin the celebration of Advent and preparing for the coming of this newborn king. And we followed all the way through the Gospels until he is hanging on the cross, and that decree above him, do you remember what it said? King of the Jews. I sometimes think, and maybe even slightly wish, there was a fast-forward button in life. The ability to skip over a couple of hours or maybe even a couple of days that perhaps I had been dreading. Maybe even skipping a couple of weeks on occasion. You may think that we already have that for as fast as time is going. Can you believe that we're here again already to start another Advent season? It seems like we just gathered together for the watch night service celebrating the turn of the century. And here we are preparing for 2018. That fast forward button, for the most part, they're wonderful holidays, but you sometimes think, gosh, if it would cost us maybe a month of fast forwarding that we would lose, but gosh, there'd be no holiday hoopla, no Christmas letters to have to read or create, no max credit cards, no crowded stores, no out-of-control office parties, no search for that perfect gift. By fast-forwarding over rather stressful season, we might even have the opportunity or a shot at experiencing this peace on earth and goodwill to all that we talk about and sing about. We may even be able to squeeze in a silent night in the midst of fast-forwarding through the holidays. But alas, there is no technology for this kind of seasonal time travel, at least not yet, but I bet somewhere somebody is working on it. The story is told of one family who tried to sort of do that. It was in a book written by John Grisham. A number of years ago now, he wrote. It was entitled Skipping Christmas. You may recall that if you didn't read the book. It was made into a movie that was just on one of the channels this weekend. Christmas with the Cranks. It starred Tim Allen and Jamie Lee Curtis and Dan Aykroyd. Tim Allen plays the lead character. He is Luther Crank is his name, and he is incensed when he realizes in reviewing the books, the family financial books, that they spent over $6,000 on last year's Christmas with absolutely nothing to show for it. And he is livid about this. So, with their only daughter going off to save the world, joining the Peace Corps, he convinces his wife to skip Christmas this year and put all the money that they would have spent on Christmas celebrations into a special fund so that they can take a Caribbean cruise. So they decide to forego all the parties, the tree, the lights, and any participation in what has become a tradition in their neighborhood of decorating houses on that street with cul-de-sac. The plot line of the rest of the movie then is how the neighbors react to the Cranks' decision to skip Christmas. In particular, the character of Dan Aykroyd, who is the neighborhood organizer of this gala of decorating all of the houses. He is not too happy about their decision. In fact, he's rather perturbed and angry about it. But is it that easy to just forego some activities? Is it possible even to skip Christmas? Well, the Cranks discover that their decision unleashes enormous consequences. And one of the biggest involves the surprise arrival just before Christmas back of their daughter from the Peace Corps with a fiancé. And she is expecting a good old-fashioned, just like it's always been, family celebration of Christmas. Apparently, Christmas is a lot like Mother's Day. You ignore it at great personal risk. That movie does have some laughter in it. There's some poignant scenes as well, but it really does raise the question, what really matters during the holiday season? Like it or not, most of us are going to be doing the shopping thing, the present thing, the Christmas tree thing, the decorations thing. But in the midst of all that frantic activity, there may be a fast forward, not a button, but a moment in there in which we skip Christmas after all, even after doing all those things that we equate with being the celebration of Christmas. In our text this morning, a rather prophetic text from Jeremiah, God is lamenting the loss of good shepherds to watch over his people Israel. And he's especially disappointed with King Jehoiakim. He lives 600 years before the arrival of Christ on the scene. And Jehoiakim abuses his people through a number of different ways, through misrule, unrighteousness, injustice. They talk about economic oppression, and even some creative bookkeeping and accounting. So when the Pharaoh of Egypt demands of Jehoiakim to pay him some kind of homage, Jehoiakim raises the money by levying a tax on the entire land. And then he skims off some of that money to use to upgrade his own personal penthouse. Needless to say, Jehoiakim is a bad shepherd. This image of shepherds and symbolizing the rulers of ancient Israel, it's one that's hard for us to grasp, perhaps, but it's one of the oldest and probably one of the most familiar throughout the Old Testament and even on into the New. Today, as we read about shepherds and sheep, we have a rather low opinion of the intellectual capacity of sheep. And so we're offended to kind of be called sheep in any way, shape, or form. And this analogy of shepherds and sheep is kind of insulting as well. But the ancients who were hearing these prophecies from Jeremiah, that was the furthest thing from their mind, because they knew what was involved in tending to sheep and being a shepherd. Even if the family didn't receive most of their income from shepherding, herding flocks was an essential part of the subsistence, the day-to-day economy of ancient Israel. Sheep and goats were vital sources for the many items that they needed to survive. The milk and meat was used for food, the wool and the hide for clothing and for shelter. And it could become very easily sort of a quick common capital to use for bartering for things that they needed that they weren't able to produce or had locally. And for Israel, even though they're not a completely, at this point, nomadic people, the vast majority of them are still moving around and following the herds for grazing. There are a few villages and towns beginning to sprout up. But even with that, they knew that in the lean years, that their whole economy could hinge on the success or the failure of their skill as caretakers of the flock, as being good shepherds. So therefore, comparing a skillful ruler to a skillful shepherd implied that the ruler understood how to guarantee the nation's survival in hard times, and also to see during the prosperity and the good times, and also looking at the hard to discern times that would be in between those highs and those lows. In the same way, and on the negative side then, bad rulers, like bad shepherds, did not know how to be caretakers of the flock. They may use up these precious resources in the good times without any planning of those lean years that would eventually and ultimately come. They never valued the flock beyond what its worth was at any given moment. They just did not see it as any kind of investment. And they didn't care for the flock so that it could consistently be strong and multiply. The result was exploitation was really the norm by these bad shepherds and bad kings. So it's in all of this that Jeremiah, this backdrop, that Jeremiah charges the leaders of Israel that like incompetent shepherds, they had destroyed the flock of God's people. And they set in motion events that would lead to their eventually being scattered and even exiled and driven away from their homes. The promised land of Israel was no longer a safe haven for them, for the nation had become fragmented and scattered. It says again in the second verse, "It is you," God talking to these ill shepherds, "it is you who have scattered my flock, charges the Lord, and have driven them away and have not attended to them. So I will attend to you for your evil doings, says the Lord." It's not a threat, it's a promise of the consequences of what they have done. God promises to gather his remnant flock together, though, to restore it again and to put his people under care of a whole new generation of kings. Kings who would be good shepherds, who would watch over their people, protect them, and keep them from getting lost. Fifth verse, better yet, God says, "I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land." As we read in last week's message, that righteous branch is none other than Jesus, born at the Christmas time, the King of Kings, the ultimate expression of the Davidic line, the Lord of Lords. Jesus comes to reign with justice, but also with righteousness, and to provide safety for all of his people. And in the very last part of our passage, the 6th verse, it says, and this name by which he will be called, the Lord is our righteousness. The Lord is our righteousness. That sounds like an odd name. And it's an unexpected name, and especially for us to use during the holidays. That doesn't really come up much in the lyrics to the songs or the the greeting cards that we receive or send. And it does not likely appear in most of our celebrations. But if we miss that little aspect, that attribute, that characteristic of God through Christ, that righteousness, there's oftentimes an automatic skip button over Christmas as a result, at least the true meaning of it. You see, Jesus is a shepherd. He's not a Santa. He doesn't dole out good stuff to good people, and he doesn't give lumps of coal to the naughty people. If we believe that the piles of presents underneath the tree is a sign of Christ's favor, then we've missed really a key component of the character of this King of Kings. For he gives more attention to the lost sheep than to those who are found, and to those who are safely at home in their flocks. The Lord is our righteousness. There's really nothing cutesy or cheerful about it. And it may not fit our fantasies of what goes into generating the Christmas spirit. But I would challenge you to see that Christmas spirit being centered in that idea of righteousness, being made right, not just with one another, but with our God. And if we ignore that role, we run the risk of missing that true meaning of Christmas. Jesus is all about righteousness, to making right our relationship with God. He came to earth for a sole purpose, and that was to reconnect us with our Creator, to connect us between one another and our God, and to help us to see that the righteousness that we may claim, the right things about us, are not coming from within us. They come from God. And this Lord righteousness is the exact opposite of the self-righteousness that we seem to allow dominate in our society and even in our culture. That self-righteousness that has kind of a smugness to it, that sense of entitlement of what I deserve, to believe that somehow our good fortune, along with the piles of gifts and presents under the Christmas tree, is because of our efforts and ours alone. One social observer noted, "The problem with so many of us today is that we make the assumption that doing well is synonymous with doing good." And he goes on to say, "We are born on third base, and we go through life believing we've hit the triple." In the face of perhaps some self-delusion, Jesus reminds me that righteousness comes from God alone. It is God who makes me righteous, and he does that through Jesus Christ. I believe that the same would be true for each of us. Being just and honorable, being free from guilt, doing the best we can, those aren't human achievements alone, but instead come to us through the life and the death, and yes, even the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Only the Lord is our righteousness, not our nationality, not our political affiliation, not our race, not our denomination, not our social class, not our alumni association with organizations. And this ironclad connection between righteousness and Jesus is at the very heart of the season we are about ready to celebrate. It's simply too good to fast forward through. There will be some bumps along the way and some new learning curves, but it is worth it. So this year, as we look ahead to Christmas, might we open up our hearts, but also our minds, to see what Jesus might bring us. And perhaps it won't just be something under the tree. He comes to us as a sign of God's great love for each and every one of us. And he offers us the gifts of forgiveness, of new life, and righteousness. He comes to earth to put us back into a right relationship with God, a right relationship that contains all the elements of a righteous life. So, this coming of Jesus is not about religion, us finding God. Instead, his coming is about relationship, of God finding us. The uncluttered message of the season is this, that righteous living is a relationship with God, nothing more and nothing less. The practical summary of the message: this means living peacefully with God and with one another. Maybe by forgiving an ornery person in your neighborhood or in your workplace, truly forgiving them. It means enjoying this world that God has created and are taking care of it. Perhaps something as simple as using the recycle bins. It means finding the ways to resolve conflict without resorting immediately to violence and anger. It may simply be talking out loud with the one who offends you. It means caring for the poor and the powerless, following the example of Christ, perhaps by taking a name from the caring tree. It means obeying the commandments of God, because those are really keys to an inner peace. Perhaps by learning those commands in a Bible study, maybe during the weeks ahead or at the start of the new year. Those aren't typically the activities we think of to celebrate Christmas or for the holiday, but do we really want to necessarily repeat the standard holiday fare that the world tells us is where it's at? To experience the righteousness of Christmas is to be drawn deeper and deeper into a close personal relationship with God. And that relationship is made visible to us by the life of Jesus Christ. The ancient prophet Jeremiah knew that we could not be good shepherds and abuse the sheep, that we couldn't be righteous rulers and misuse our power or our resources. And Jesus felt the exact same way. That's why both of them invited us into a right relationship with God. One that took seriously the need to look beyond our self-interests. And as verse 5 says, execute justice and righteousness in the land. God so loved the world that he didn't give up on us. He loved us so much that he came himself to show us another way, to reveal what we have been missing, to offer us a new opportunity to make it right, to enjoy his presence, his love, and to once again be formed into his image. Lord Righteousness. It's not just some regal title to be lorded over us. It is a rightness that God offers to each of us. There's no barrier, there's no terror, there is no body and no thing that can keep us from God's love. And that's an awesome reason for us to hope. Don't fast forward or skip over this holy day or the holidays to follow, but use them as opportunities to focus your attention on the coming of Jesus Christ, the one who shows us that the Lord is our righteousness. Lord, righteousness. Amen. Please rise.